Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Sutta.
The following is class from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 51, Text 49, given by His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, recorded on January 29, 1994, in Mumbai.
Ramasamucha iti kritya chintaya Pravridha lobham dishayeshu lalasam Swama pramata sahasapi pajyase Shule lihano hi ivakumantaka. A man possessed with thoughts of what he thinks needs to be done, intensely greedy and delighting in sense enjoyment, is suddenly confronted by you, who are ever alert, like a hungry snake licking its fangs before a mouse. You appear before him as death. The body at first rides high on fierce elephants or chariots, adorned with gold, and is known by the name King, is later, by your invincible power, called thesis, worms, or ashes. Having conquered the entire circle of directions, and being thus free of conflict, a man sits on a splendid throne, receiving praise from leaders who were once his equals, but when he enters the woman's chambers, where sex pleasure is found, he is led about like a pet animal, O Lord. A king who desires even greater power than he already has strictly performs his duties, carefully practicing austerity and foregoing sense enjoyment. But he whose urges are so rampant, thinking I am independent and supreme, cannot attain happiness. When the material life of a wandering soul has ceased, O Achyuta, he may attain association of your devotees. And when he associates with them, there awakens in him devotion unto you, who are the Lord, who are the goal of the devotees, and the Lord of all causes and their effects. Purport. Acharyas Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti agree on the following point. Although it is stated here that when material life ceases, one attains the association of devotees, in fact, it is the association of the Lord's devotees that enables one to transcend material existence. Srila Jiva Goswami explains this apparent inversion of sequence by quoting the Kavya Prakash as follows. Karya karanayoscha purvaparavya viparyayo vigyayati shahyayokti syatsa. A statement in which the logical order of a cause and its effect is reversed should be understood as ati sayokti, emphasis by extreme assertion. Srila Jiva Goswami cites the following commentary on this statement. Karanasya shigra karitam vaktum karyasya purvam ukto. To express the swift action of a cause, one may assert the result before the cause. In this connection, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that the merciful association of the Lord's devotees makes possible our determination to become Krishna conscious. And the Acharya agrees with Srila Jiva Goswami that this verse is an instance of Ati Sayokti. when the material life of a wandering soul has ceased, O Achyuta, you may attain the association of your devotees, and when he associates with them, there awakens in him devotion unto you, who are the goal of the devotees and the Lord of all causes and their effects. Maharaj Muchakunda is continuing in these verses his prayers of great devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. Herein he is speaking not only according to the conclusions of the Shastras, but according to his own personal realizations. Muchakunda Maharaj was a great king. We have read he had attained what is very rare for any king to accomplish. He had conquered all directions. His kingdom was peaceful. He had no enemies. And he had full support and confidence from all of his subjects. He also had a beautiful, loving family. He was living luxuriously and very peacefully. But the demigods, who are the Lord's devotees, they were having great difficulty. The Asuras were conquering their abodes. So they came to Maharaj Muchakunda asking for help. And such a great devotee as he was willing to leave everything to accept terrible wars, fighting fiercely against the demons. And these wars went on for so long because he was fighting in the heavenly areas, and the time difference is much greater than here on the earth. Generations went by. His family, they all died. His kingdom, everything was lost. When finally Kartikeya was born, the demigods, with gratefulness, they told Muchakunda, we require no longer your service. You have sacrificed everything just to serve the Lord's devotees. We want to offer you a benediction. He asked that I've been fighting so long without even sleep. Give me the boon that I can sleep. And if anyone tries to disturb me, I will destroy them. So he went into a secluded cave of a mountain, and in the darkness of that cave he slept for many years. But because he had rendered this service to the Lord's devotees, the Lord did not forget him. The Lord arranged for the demon Kaliyavana to kick him, to wake him up. Muchakunda burned the demon Kaliyavana to ashes by his mere glance. And after waking from the darkness of his sleep, he was able to behold the beautiful and most precious darshan of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And Lord Sri Krishna, after explaining to Muchakunda who he was, he offered Muchakunda any benediction he so desired. And thus these prayers have begun. Muchakunda is explaining the futility of any material benediction on this earth. Because after all, even though one may be a great king and conqueror, it is a temporary position. Even such a great king riding on fierce elephants and wonderfully decorated chariots, eventually the Lord appears before him as death. And then this body he so proudly maintains, this body that is so much glorified by others, it is transformed into worms or dust or ashes. So Muchakunda is wondering, when this body is inevitably to be transformed into dust or ashes, why? Why should we ask anything for this body? Srila Prabhupada explains that this body that we love and care for so much, we should know that its ultimate destination is to become either stool or dust or ashes, depending on the particular process our culture deals with dead corpses. Prabhupada explains, in some societies they bring the dead body to a rooftop or to a mountaintop where they allow birds to eat it, vultures, hawks, eagles. And these meat-eating birds, they just rip your body to shreds with their beaks, and they eat it. And I've seen how they do it. First, the vultures, they go inside your body through the rear side, and they pull your entrails out, tearing the whole body open. And then they start from the inside with all the blood and all the organs, and they just eat it and drink it from the inside out. And they start sucking and licking on your bones. They have nice feast. And then they digest it, and then they pass stool. And what are you? You become the stool of the vulture. Abominable. After the vulture eats the body of your loved one, when it passes stool in your face, you don't think, oh, how wonderful, my mother has returned. You think, oh God, let me wash this terrible, filthy substance away. But the fact is, what is the difference? The same body perhaps of your wife or your husband who you were embracing and having so many loving affairs with, when that body is recycled through the vulture and becomes stool, you just can't tolerate it. You don't want to look at it. You don't want to smell it. You take baths. But really, it's simply the same elements, just recycled. And some people, they bury their bodies in the ground, 6 feet down, and then the worms and the maggots, they start to eat that body. And time decays it. And in time it becomes putrefied, rotten, and gradually it turns into dust. From dust you come, to dust you return. And in other civilizations, like in India, the custom is to burn the body. So that means this body that you're caring for with such attention, with such care, this body that you're willing to insult, cheat, even kill your own loved ones to protect. Kamsa, just to maintain his body, he was willing to kill his own sister Devaki by slicing her head with a sword. What people do just to protect this body. Not knowing that the soul is actually the real person that is enjoying and suffering. If we commit sinful activities, the soul has to be transported into the most miserable possible conditions. But to maintain this body, we're willing to degrade the soul and subject it to so much suffering. When ultimately, what is the final result of this body that we live for? In a few short years, it becomes nothing more than a handful of ashes. It is put in a burning pyre, and the flames consume it. And sometimes people take that little handful of ashes and put it in some container. Usually, someone just comes with a broom and just sweeps it in the river. That's you. That's what you've given your life so carefully. Women, how much they stand before the mirror, putting on cosmetics, smiling at themselves to see how they look, combing their hairs, putting all sorts of perfumes, decorating with jewelry, fine, luxurious clothing, and then they see in the mirror, oh, I'm so beautiful, I'm so wonderful. Who will not be attracted to me? But in a few short years, you become nothing but a drab pile of ashes. And some of you may have seen what happens to the body during the burning process. When I first came to India in 1970, I really wanted to understand what is this Vedic culture and what is the truth underlying this world. What is life? What is death? So I was thinking, in order to understand what is life, you have to understand what is death. So I would sit at the funeral pyres in Varanasi and just sit for long periods of time just watching what happens to the body as it's burning, meditating on death. This is before I met Prabhupada. You can see the difference between various yoga processes and Lord Chaitanya's movement. Now we're meditating on the beautiful form of Radha Gopinath and dancing and chanting. In those days, my sadhana was to sit and watch burning bodies. And I can't tell you how, stage by stage, so many bodies, they all go through the same transformations. People are crying, weeping. They come with the funeral procession. The men are looking down, the women are sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. Then they put it on the fire, then they do some rituals, some priest. Then they start the body on fire, then everyone goes away. And the body's left burning. And just myself and one or two other sadhus are just sitting, meditating. What is this death? And the beautiful hair that you're so nicely combing every day and spending so much money on perfumed oils. Immediately the hair just goes and within seconds it's just finished. And then the flesh that your loved one is caressing so nice, oh, you are so soft. You're so smooth. You're so tender. And you're buying nice oils and nice perfumes and other lubricants to keep your body soft and fresh, your flesh. That flesh, all of a sudden, it starts going, it appears like it's melting. It starts melting. It starts dissolving in the heat of the fire. And then all of a sudden, you just start seeing the skull and the bones just emerging from the dissolving flesh. And then all of a sudden, an eyeball goes and just comes out. Sometimes falls to the ground due to the pressure. Sometimes that happens. Not always, but oftentimes. And then, all of a sudden, you see the skeleton of the arm just go, just fall to the ground. And the bones of the leg just fall to the ground. Sometimes there's all kinds of sounds coming from in the skull because there's pressures going. And then gradually, even the bones begin to disintegrate in the fire, in the heat, until all that's left is just ashes and a few chunks, a few small chunks of bone and some other parts of the body. But it is all indiscernible. And they keep the fire going and going and going for a long time. And pretty soon all that's left is the fire goes down and there's just ashes. And sometimes somebody stays around to collect some of the ashes, but usually the whole family practically leaves. At least this is what I was seeing. And somebody just comes with a broom and just sweeps it all in the Ganges. And then we used to sit downstream, a few feet away, and we'd see the ashes in the Ganges just merging into the river, just going down the stream. And a few feet later, there's a bathing ghat, and people take their bath, and when they take their bath, all the ashes go on their bodies. This is what you're giving your life for. How long do you think your body's going to last before it becomes stool, dust, or ashes? And when people see the body burning, they all realize it's just a few years till this is the destiny of that body that I call me, that I'm giving my life to enjoy. It really doesn't make much difference. Once your body becomes ashes, no one will recognize whether you were a king or whether you were a peasant or a sweeper of the street. No one could discriminate between the vulture stool, the dust, or the ashes of a great conqueror or an insignificant peasant. There's really no difference. Therefore, Mutrakunda Maharaj is here declaring that this bodily conception of life is such an illusion. And he was such a great king. And he knew, kings know what other kings really are. You see, the general people, we have a very, very glamorous idea of what a king is, because we don't know the inside stories. But a king knows the inside story of all other kings, because they all live essentially the same way. And here he's explaining that having conquered the entire circle of directions, and being thus free from conflict. Such a king sits on a splendid throne, receiving praise from leaders who were once his equals. But when he enters into the women's chambers, where sex pleasure is found, he is led about like a pet animal. You know what a pet animal is? A pet animal, they just do whatever you tell them. They're completely dependent on you. Because you give the pet animal food, the pet animal will do anything for you. You know, that's how you train animals. By letting them know that you're the one that feeds them. Because you're feeding them, they're obliged to you. And they know that if they don't do whatever you say, you're not going to feed them. That's how you train an animal. Through the process of food and punishment. Punishment means you don't give them food. In America, they train dogs, horses, very common. You tell the dog, sit. The dog sits. Because the dog knows that if I don't sit, I won't get any food. Lay down. The dog lays down. Because the dog knows that this master is feeding me, and I need food. I cannot live without food. Bark. The dog goes, because, no, I must. This is the hand that feeds me. There's a saying, don't bite the hand that feeds you. This is the way dogs are trained. And in this way, because you are giving them reward in the form of food, the dog is just your pet animal. He'll just do anything for you. You say, come, and he comes. You say, go, and he goes. He becomes a watchdog. Anyone who comes, he will protect you. He'll do anything for you. King Muchukunda is explaining that even the greatest leaders and conquerors and kings and the most powerful men in the world, when they come into the woman's chambers, they're like a pet animal. Why? Just as the dog is so anxious for food, because such a king cannot control his senses, he's dependent on sex pleasure to survive. He's so eager and anxious due to lust for sexual enjoyment. And his queen, she's the one that feeds him sex pleasure. Just like we feed the dog to give him pleasure, the queen feeds the king with the food of sex pleasure, which he's so anxious to receive. Although he's sitting on the throne and everyone thinks, oh, he's so wonderful. In order to sit on that throne, he has to go through so much anxiety and so much turmoil and so much battle and conflict to rule the state that he seeks shelter. He seeks release of all of his anxieties through the sexual pleasures with his queen. And because the queen knows that actually he's dependent on me. If I don't give him these pleasures, then he'll starve sexually. And although the queen may be very expert and appear like a very submissive servant, always faithful to him, always following behind him in the rear with her head covered, looking like anything you tell me, I'll do, in her heart she knows he's under my control. He's my pet animal. This doesn't only refer to kings either. So, in this way, he's like pet animal, led about here and there, Mukunda is explaining what an embarrassing situation this is. He's thinking he's independent and supreme. But because he cannot conquer his senses and his mind, he's actually a slave. He's actually a pet animal. And when the material life of a wandering soul has ceased, Muchakunda says, at that time, he may attain the association of your devotees. This is a wonderful explanation given by Srila Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is a perfect scripture that is absolute and perfect in every respect. And Shukadev Goswami is here explaining that when one's material life of such a wandering soul has ceased, then he may attain the association of your devotees, my Lord. But we know from our own example that without the association of devotees, there's no hope of ever ceasing our material activities. And the Acharyas explain this following point, that adosha tata sadhu sango tha bhajana kriya tato narta nivrittita tato nishta ruchistata ata shaktistata bhava. At first, there's a little faith in your heart. Krishna's in your heart. He sees you have that faith. He sees you have some desire for what is sublime. And Krishna, by his causeless mercy, directs you to the association of devotees. That's the first stage on the path of bhakti. The first stage is when Krishna directs you due to that little faith to the satsang of devotees. And it is in the association of devotees that you begin to reevaluate your whole life. When you hear from them, you understand that I'm an illusion, that I'm really not this body, that I'm meant for Krishna's service. And then you begin to engage in the process of devotional service. Then you accept a spiritual master in that association of devotees. And then you begin the process of bhajana kriya, hearing and chanting and following of regulative principles, strictly. This is called Vaidhi Bhakti, devotional service under strict rules and regulations. And gradually through this process of hearing and chanting, following principles, strictly, anartha nivritti shat, gradually all of the unwanted desires of the heart are cleansed. And then there is firm faith. Then there is ruchi, higher taste. Then atashakti, attachment to Krishna, attachment to the service of Krishna. And gradually bhava, love, and prema, pure, unmotivated love. So it is through the association of devotees that we can become free from material life and the bodily conception. But why it says here that after material life ceases, one attains the association of devotees? Just to give emphasis and stress that association of devotees is so powerful that you can consider as soon as you come into that association, your material life is as good as finished. It's absolute, it's definite, it's 100% that your material life will cease if you simply remain within that association of devotees. Muchakunda, such a highly liberated and realized soul, He's giving us the following information through his own realizations and experience, that there's not much value in material wealth. He had it all. There's not much value in power and control and influence over others and great amounts of prestige, because he had it all. There's not much value in being recognized and glorified and praised and appreciated by others, because he had it all. There's not much value in the wonderful pleasures of sexual affairs with even the most beautiful, faithful, and chaste queens, because he had all that. There's not much value in conquering all directions, because he did it. What else is there in life? What is it that he didn't have? He had everything. He had everything so full that any materialistic person ever wants. But after going through all that, he said, it's all useless. What's really of true value? The association of devotees. King Mutsukunda is saying, that's all. That's the only thing you have that's of any real value. You should be willing to trade everything off for the association of devotees if that's what's required. Because through the association of devotees, we can become freed from the bondage, the affliction, and the infection of material attachment, which ultimately leads us to stool, dust, or ashes. Through the association of devotees, we can realize and experience that we're not destined to be stool, dust, or ashes. We're destined to be the eternal loving servants of Sri Sri Radha Gopinath in their most splendid and illustrious abode of Goloka Vrindavan. And in Goloka Vrindavan there's no stool, dust, or ashes, because no bodies die there. Nobody gets eaten by vultures. Nobody gets buried in the ground. You never see pictures of cemeteries in Goloka Vrindavan. In Goloka Vrindavan, you see swans, beautiful, singing birds of life, not birds of death. Because in Goloka Vrindavan, we take on a body that is qualitatively one with Krishna. Satchit Ananda Vigraha. We have a body of a Gopa or a Gopi, depending on whether we are in Shantaras or Dasyaras, Sakyaras, Vatsalyaras, or Madhuryaras. In this sweet land of Brajbhumi, or even in the beautiful, illustrious abode of Vaikunta, everyone has a body that radiates spiritual light, that is not subject to birth, old age, disease, or death. It is divine, transcendental, and eternal. But the glory of our eternal existence is not that we have such a body, but that that body is always immersed in the ecstatic association of Radha and Krishna. That it is always immersed in the ocean of ecstasy. The exchange of ecstasies between Krishna and his devotees continues to increase for all eternity. This is the result of associating with Krishna's devotees. And what is the result of everything else we do in this world outside of associating with devotees? Stool, dust, or ashes. This is our choice. how valuable, how precious is the opportunity to sit with the devotees, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, to dance with the devotees while chanting the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare. To bathe in the dust of the feet of the devotees through the process of serving them with humility, prideless devotion. Yes, everything that we are striving to attain in this world, Muchakunda, he strived for it, he attained it. Let's take his word for it. His conclusion was that everything is an illusion, everything is worthless, except the opportunity to associate with Krishna's devotees. Because in that association, he says, devotion unto Krishna awakens within the heart. Because Krishna is the goal of the devotees. And in their company, Krishna becomes our goal of life. And all these other goals fall to the side. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was asked how to become a pure devotee, he replied, Asat Sangatyaga Avaishnav Acha. You want to become devotee of Krishna? This is the process. Always associate with Vaishnavas and always avoid the association of those who are too materially inclined and those who are not devotees. And then the straight and pure path back to Godhead is very simple. And in that association, always remember Krishna by chanting his holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare. Any questions?
Maharaj, this question may be a little offensive, so I am begging forgiveness from our devotees asking such a question. What we see in Vedic times, that the devotees of the Lord, they were glorified after they passed. Means we don't see that any shrine or any samadhi mandir or any something was created. And in the modern times it has become quite popular to build big temples for a devotee and worship them almost on the level of the god. So why this thing has become popular in the modern times and it was not present in the Vedic culture?
Why you say not in Vedic culture? How far back can we go? We see the samadhis of so many of the great ancient acharyas. But you know, in time, when you're speaking thousands or millions of years, hardly anything remains from that time. But we find in the Vaishnav line, in Sri Rangam, is the Samadhi of Ramanujacharya. That was over 800 years ago. In Udupi, Madhvacharya's body just disappeared, but the place that it disappeared, in the Ananteshwar Mandir, it is still being worshipped. That was about 700 years ago. In Vrindavan we see the samadhis of Srila Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Lokanath Goswami, Narottam Das Thakur, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Most of these persons, their bodies approximately 500 years ago. So the process of glorifying the great souls in their samadhis is something that has been accepted as long as our time dimension can perceive. It is explained in the Shastra how to create the samadhi of a great personality. So as far as we know, this has always been done. If you go in our disciplic succession, we have the samadhis of all the great souls to the time of Madhvacharya. And as far as Vedavyas, he doesn't have a samadhi because he never dies. And as far as Narada Muni, he doesn't have a samadhi because he never dies. And as far as Lord Brahma, he's still living in Brahmaloka. And he lives until the end of the universe. And when there's no universe, then there's not going to be a samadhi for him. There's no place for his samadhi in the physical sense. And as far as Krishna, for worldly people, if you go to Prabhas Chetra, you have been there? There's the place, his footprints, which is like samadhi. It's where he disappeared from the world. Although we understand that he never actually left this world. He never dies. Krishna's eternal. But still, the place where he left is there that you can still worship. Did you go to Prabhas Chetra with us last year? So in this sense, if we go through our disciplic succession, every one of the acharyas, except those who never die, there's a samadhi for. Practically. So it is not just something of modern times. It is a timeless tradition. Any other questions?
Maharaj, if choice is given, then we are more inclined towards sense gratification, material enjoyment. Why is so?
Because it is our conditioning. Because we are habituated to sense gratification since time immemorial. We have not been trained in spiritual discipline. For so many births, we have been trained to enjoy our senses. And the nature of this material world is the three modes of material nature are always directing our consciousness towards sense gratification. It is material nature to want to enjoy sense gratification. And because we are materially influenced, it is our nature to become enjoyers. In this way, the soul is in a condition of forgetfulness. But as through the process of devotional service, which begins with Vaidhi Bhakti, which means you have to forcibly restrain your senses and forcibly and strictly engage your mind and senses in Krishna's service. Through that process, you recondition yourself. You rehabituate yourself. And gradually your original spiritual qualities begin to awaken, at which time it's the nature simply to serve Krishna and love Krishna. It is our original nature. But in order to bring this original nature to the forefront in our life, we require sadhana bhakti. We require purification. In the neophyte state, in Vaidhi Bhakti stage, our nature is sense gratification, and our austerity is to perform Krishna consciousness. In the purified state, our nature is simply the loving service of the Lord. The desires for sense gratification disappear. When you're in a diseased condition, it's your nature to suffer. But you have to take your medicine regularly to purify yourself of that disease. Then there is no more suffering.
Sometimes we justify by saying, practically, somebody asked me last week that, well, sannyasis is doing something is different and grastashram is something different, so we justify that we should be more practical, just going towards one side of the spiritual side and instead of we must make adjustment with the material.
The varnashram system is practical. Grihastas do not live like sannyasis. Grihastas have a different austerity than sannyasis. Grihastas are not supposed to live like sannyasis. But they're not supposed to live like grihamedis either. Grihamedi means household life where there is no restriction. Grihasta life means a civilized, strict life, following particular regulative principles for the sanctity of their homes and their families. Sannyasi is not allowed to own anything. Grihasta is allowed to own anything. It's allowed to own a land, a property. Sannyasis are not allowed to have sex. Grihasta is allowed to have sex, but under certain regulative principles. Sannyasis are not allowed to have wealth. Grihastas are allowed to have wealth according to regulative principles. That they're meant to be charitable with their wealth. They're meant to earn it by moral, honest ways as far as possible. In this way, it is not that grihastas are supposed to be sannyasis. They're supposed to be grihastas. Civilized, strict, humble, charitable family should be the goal of grihasta life, where Krishna is in the center, service to sadhus is in the center of our existence. But if there's no rules and regulations in grihasta ashram, it becomes grihamedi, simply a deep, dark well where there's nothing but bondage and suffering and great darkness. Any other questions?
This person whom I met is really a successful person. What he said is every time he attends funeral of anyone, this realization comes to him that he should renounce everything. Well, when he comes back, he forgets. He's got a very big business, very hard-working person, but that moment he realizes he should give up everything that is useless. So what Maharaj would like to say?
Yes. Most people, when they're at a funeral, they are just like this. But because they don't have association of devotees, they forget. Just like when you're in Srimad Bhagavatam class, sometimes you get enlightenment. But then when you leave, you forget. You get caught up in your worldly affairs. Similar. Therefore, we need to regularly associate with devotees. If that person went to a funeral every day, he'd probably become Krishna conscious. But because he only goes now and then, he forgets. Nasta prayesha bhadreshu nityam bhagavati sevaya. We need regular association of devotees. We need to regularly be enlightened. Because the nature of the world is that we get enlightened and then modes of nature put that enlightenment in the background. Therefore we must associate with devotees regularly. We must chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Japa, every day. We must hear Srimad Bhagavatam every day. It is essential. Because your tendency and my tendency is the same as that man's tendency. In that atmosphere we are enlightened, but then we forget. If we're sincere, we have to keep coming into the atmosphere of enlightenment. You see, like medicine, you are a doctor. If someone has a terrible skin disease, you don't just tell them, take this pill once, and then don't worry about it. You tell them you take it 3 times a day, every day, for the next month. Right? Then it has effect. Because the nature of disease, if someone has some skin disease, they rub some ointment and put some pill, and it goes down a little, but then it comes back up. Therefore you have to keep doing, until gradually it goes away. So similarly, this is how we need to associate with devotees and chant the holy name. We come to the association, we chant the holy name, and in the association we feel the itching disease of our material life go down. But then we go out, and again it inflares. becomes inflamed. Keep taking regularly, gradually becomes purified.
Why is it said that to touch a dead body it is inauspicious? It is just like any matter. You're not supposed to enter the temple.
It's not just like any matter, because we discriminate. There are certain discriminations. When you touch stool, that's also matter. Correct? When you touch urine, that's also matter. When you touch blood, that's also matter. There's so many types of matter. We discriminate. Some are considered pure and some are considered impure. Do you take bath in urine? What's the difference between water and urine? They're both matter. But one is considered pure and one is considered impure. Huh? Do you take bath and vomit? No. You take bath and water. So we have to discriminate. What is clean and what is unclean? And why do we discriminate? Because we want to present ourselves in as clean a possible way before Krishna. If you associate with unclean things, you become infected by that. If you associate with clean things, you become affected by that. Cleanliness is next to godliness. And how do we clean ourselves? Physically, we clean ourselves with fresh, pure water. And internally, we clean ourselves with the holy name of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare. The dead body is considered impure because as soon as the soul leaves the body begins to decompose. It becomes rotten. Becomes rotten flesh. Not considered pure. Immediately, bacteria starts decomposing. All types of worms and other types of creatures begin to take birth in that body and start eating it. Decomposed and rotten. We must discriminate according to the Shastra. And of course, Srila Prabhupada explains that the Shastras, ultimately you just have to accept their authority. You can't figure it out with your brain. Because it says in the Shastra that bone of a dead creature is considered contaminated. And also stool from any creature is considered contaminated. But yet we bathe Krishna's body in cow dung. And every day we begin arti by blowing on the conch shell. In fact, many deities, the small deities, their eyes are made out of conch shells, which is the bone of an animal. So how do you understand? The Shastra says bone is contaminated. If you touch bone, you have to take bath. But we blow the conch shell every day before arti. And it says that if you touch stool, you have to take bath. Even your own stool. After you go to respond to nature in this way, you have to take bath, otherwise you're considered unclean. But yet, we are bathing Krishna, pouring the stool of a cow on Krishna's body. And how are we pouring it on his body? With a conch shell. Bone. Bone and stool are both contaminated. You have to bathe after touching it. You have to bathe after touching it. But we're bathing Krishna with stool and bones. Cow dung from a conch shell. How do you explain? You cannot explain. All you can do is accept the authority of Shastra. That cow dung is pure and the conch shell is pure. And there is so much scientific, they say that cow dung has antiseptic properties and everything else like that. But we don't care about what the scientists say about antiseptic properties. We simply accept it because it is in the Shastra. We're safe. In this way we discriminate. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Hare Thank you very much.